Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squad for boxing news and views from around the internet. The Russian prospect Arslanbek Makhmudov has stopped Jonathan Rice in 7 rounds in Montreal. The rising prospect is now 8-0 with 8 knockouts to his name. This was quite an interesting fight for a number of reasons, because heading into this fight, Makhmudov needed some rounds. So far in his short pro career, heading into this fight, it was 7 wins, 7 KOs, and only 8 total rounds. So they needed to put him in there with a guy that he could actually go a few rounds with, that could take his power, because that's been the thing that's really separated him from some of his peers coming up in the division at the moment. He's very heavy-handed, and in an opponent in Jonathan Rice, who has never been stopped before, this was the sort of guy that could potentially give Makhmudov some work, and so it proved in this fight. And Rice, for a time, he fancied his chances of being able to take this one deeper into the fight and then maybe start doing some things himself, but ultimately Makhmudov had other plans. So starting out from round 1, it was a pretty clear strategy from both guys. Makhmudov stalking forward, looking to set up his power right hand, and Rice utilizing that movement, utilizing the ring, making himself a difficult target to track down. And it's got to be said that Arslanbek Makhmudov doesn't really cut the ring off that well, and at times he was almost, in the first couple of rounds, there were points where he was almost charging at Rice, trying to track him down and finding fresh air, Rice sort of slipping out and sort of circling away. But there were a couple of right hands that were landing early on, but not flush. Rice was able to sort of ride some punches, or they were cuffing shots, but it was becoming clear, especially because there was very much a pattern in this fight. Makhmudov was trying to track him down, and Rice was really on his bike, trying to, throw the odd jab, trying to throw his right hand at times, but he was letting Makhmudov do all the work. The strategy was clear. He was going to see if Makhmudov would sort of empty his tank, and maybe he would be able to do something later on. Through the sort of rounds 2, 3, 4, 5, it was becoming clear that Makhmudov was starting to get closer to Rice. He was able to get a few more shots away. He was also trying to land the odd jab to the body, but that was something that sort of faded as the rounds went on, and Makhmudov was certainly a little bit guilty of going headhunting, although, with his power in the heavy hands, as I'm about to come to it, ultimately it paid off. But round 6, Makhmudov, he finally catches up with Rice, lands a monster right hand, and it drops Rice. So Rice, very durable. Until this point, he had avoided pretty much everything that Makhmudov had thrown at him, able to ride the shots and sort of keep out of danger for the most part, but he couldn't avoid this, and he was down on the canvas. He was hurt, but it was towards the back end of the round. So Makhmudov jumped straight back on him, but Rice is able to survive. And into round 7, Makhmudov kept the pressure on, eventually landing successive hard right hands, followed by an uppercut, and then another right hand over the top, and it's at this point that the referee jumps in. He waves it off. And Jonathan Rice, I thought he was a little bit unlucky here, because he wasn't down, and sure, these were heavy shots, telling shots, but he didn't seem too badly hurt. He hadn't been dropped to the canvas, and as soon as the referee waved it off, he was sort of seemed to be perplexed. He was saying, "I can continue." He was gesturing that sort of thing. But obviously the fight was off, and Makhmudov gets his 8th knockout in his 8th professional fight. So this one goes 7 rounds. So it's worth noting that 7 rounds was effectively almost double the rounds that he'd had, 8 previous rounds from his 7 previous fights. So it was good, this sort of fight for Arslanbek Makhmudov, because he needed someone who was tough and durable. And there was a lot of good in this performance, but there was also, some stuff that he didn't do so well. And we'll start with the bad. There wasn't a lot of variation. I mean, I've said previously for some of his fights that he does tend to rely on the right hand and the right uppercut almost exclusively at times, and for much of this fight he was just looking to set up the right hand and the right hand only. Wasn't a lot of variation. There was the odd good jab to the body early on, but that sort of fell by the wayside, and it did appear that if Rice was going to be able to sort of take this deeper, that if he was investing more to the body, as his corner was telling him to, that he may have been able to slow down Rice a little bit sooner, but ultimately he did find a home for that right hand at some point. And I guess in some respect, similar to Deontay Wilder, he doesn't need to be perfect throughout the fight, but he's going to land that at some point and it's going to hurt. And Rice, very durable guy, never stopped before. He was dropped heavily in that 6th round and obviously didn't have an answer for those shots that he took in the 7th, although, potentially a little bit premature. But it is what it is now. It is ruled a knockout win. And a couple of other things Makhmudov maybe didn't do so well. Cutting off the ring, he was sort of just tracking after Jonathan Rice, not really cutting off the ring, just following him around for the most part. And that was something that he was doing in a couple of his previous other fights. But he was, on the plus side, he was remaining patient. He wasn't expending too much energy. There were times where he was sort of charging or, throwing a reckless right hand or a combination, trying to land something and finding fresh air. But, he did actually, for the most part, he was well composed and he was patient, knowing that he was going to get something in at some point. And he didn't seem like he was too gassed or anything at the time of the stoppage, and he was conserving his energy to some extent. This was, I think, the right opponent at the right time for Arslanbek Makhmudov. He needed a guy like Jonathan Rice to actually push him a little bit, not be a stationary target where he could just get off his, heavy-handed, right uppercuts or right hands, because we've seen that, been there, done that, got the postcard with him. So it was good to see Jonathan Rice trying to make him think a bit, trying to actually push him to try a few things, and ultimately Makhmudov was able to, and it must be said, throughout these rounds, he was winning them. He was. Rice just wasn't doing enough on the offensive end. There was, I think, was it round 3 or round 4? Rice was a little bit more offensively aggressive, but apart from that, he was really, on his bike. He was riding the shots. He was trying to avoid Makhmudov's power, trying to wear him down and wear him out. And obviously, he was going to try to have some sort of last stand later in the fight or something to that effect, because it was pretty clear after the first 5 or 6 rounds that, he'd lost them all. It was never going to, he was never going to get a decision there. So he was going to have to do something at some point. But unfortunately for him, Makhmudov caught up with him. His record remains perfect, moves to 8-0, and overall it was a decent performance. Obviously I'm sort of analysing a few things and being a little bit critical of some of the things he could have done better, and obviously these are some of the things that he'll be looking to perfect. But I hope he gets to have a few more opponents like this in the next sort of 6 to 12 months, because a guy like Jonathan Rice was, even though he's got a low profile among fans in general, he is actually a pretty decent boxer. He pushed Tony Yoka when they fought, 18 months ago or so. That was a pretty tough fight for Yoka. Went to a decision. Ultimately, Yoka got that one. But I think Arslanbek Makhmudov, if you compared the two performances, it was a much more dominant performance, and it was clear that Rice was a little bit worried about the sting in Makhmudov's punches, didn't want any part of it, and was really trying to use his athleticism and his movement and his footwork to try to stay out of danger for the most part. And, for several rounds it was pretty successful. He didn't take too many shots flush, but Makhmudov stayed with his game plan. He eventually landed the punch that he wanted to. That was in round 6, and obviously did the job in round 7. What do you make of Arslanbek Makhmudov at this point in his career? How far can he go? At this point, I have him as a top 5 prospect, but I've got a few reservations with, how quick are his feet and his hands? Can he deal with some of the guys that maybe a bit slicker than Rice, can utilize movement a bit more, but are able to potentially pick Makhmudov apart with their skills, because he is open to being hit. His hands are dangerously low at times, and that was something that Rice wasn't able to take advantage of. But overall, it was a good win. Drop a comment loud and often, hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.